Well, apparently there is an old medieval custom that began in southern Germany, in Bavaria, and the custom is called Risus Paschalis. What would happen is on Easter Sunday morning, the local priest was supposed to start church with a joke. He would come down into the body of the church and he would tell jokes. Apparently some of them were quite risque, and sing nonsense songs so that the building would become full of laughter and the hysterics would be heard down in the village and people would come and join in. Now, southern Germans aren't all that famous for being funny. There's a lot of things to not laugh about in Bavaria and southern Germany, but the point is obvious, isn't it? The laughter echoing through the church is like the cosmic laugh, because Jesus is alive and he's on the loose. All the forces that conspired to lay him in the tomb, the fury, the lovelessness, the violence, the vaunted powers of kings and empires, they're made a laughing stock because death cannot hold him. God has the final laugh. We have been following the Gospel of Mark over these past 10 weeks, and it began right at the beginning, chapter 1, verse 1, where it says, "This is the good news of Jesus, the Son of God." Or did we really think that the Son of God would stay dead? At first glance, though, it seems silly because dead men don't get up. We've got a machine at the back in the cupboard called a defibrillator. We hope we never need it, but we've got it there just in case. If someone has a cardiac arrest or someone's heart stops, you can get it revived again. But not someone who's been torn to pieces, as Jesus was. And yet 28 lifetimes ago, something happened. A movement began, the like of which has not been seen in the history of the human race. In the middle of the first century, something explodes gently and kindly into the world. A peculiar message comes out. And the people who tell it are nobodies, and they're often weak and unimpressive, the bottom rung of society. They don't have an army, they don't have a great leader. And at the heart of the message, which would become the greatest movement in human history, is not an ethical system or a set of spiritual disciplines, but of a person doing something. The central message was, we've seen him. He's risen. There were 3 men crucified on that Friday afternoon. Why do people only remember the middle one? More than that, about 7 billion people today think the middle one was God. Why Jesus of Nazareth? Why is he remembered? Well, because there's disturbingly good evidence that the corpse stood up and walked out of the tomb. Now, I could talk on and on about this, but really I just wanted to focus our minds on just those few verses from Mark chapter 16, 1 to 8, and perhaps the ones that come before it, 1 to 9, and the verses that come before then. We have 4 good histories of Jesus. All are adamant that he's risen, but this account is maybe the most unusual. It finishes, for example, at the end with no Jesus. The other accounts talk about his appearances, but this doesn't mention his appearances. And then it finishes suddenly. There's no Mary weeping, there's no doubting Thomas, there's no Emmaus Road, there's no disciples, just 3 women, an angel, an empty tomb, and a message. And the early Christians must have found it a bit frustrating because, and thought they might rewrite the ending. It's there if you want to see it. It's just underneath that line on page 1011. There's nothing to be hidden here. They put it there. It's just that it doesn't appear to be from Mark's hand at all. It seems to have come much later. It doesn't appear in the earlier manuscripts. So it looks like people are a little bit nervous about the shortness of it, and they've decided they're going to put an ending on there. Because it ends so mysteriously and ambiguously. The only people who know Jesus is risen say nothing because they're scared. And even if they did speak, who would listen to them? Because the earliest witnesses are women. Now, please don't get annoyed with me. I'm not saying that I think this is a good thing. It's just back in that day and in that culture, women were ineligible to be witnesses at law. In fact, if you had a court case that you had to take to court and your only witness was a woman, then don't waste your money. That's the way people thought. So Mark's taken some big risks in ending his account of Jesus' life just like this. Why? Well, maybe it's just the way it happened. God chose these women to be the first witnesses. See, if Mark was an inventor, then why have such a quick finish? Why not go on and on? Why downplay it? Why include such impressive witnesses? Well, I'd suggest to you it's because Mark knows the message can speak for itself. The news of Jesus rising doesn't need any things to prop it up. It doesn't need any embellishing. He's happy just to say what was said. Well, let's have a look at it. If you've got it there in front of you, we're on page 1010 of the Red Bibles, chapter 16, verse 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who'll roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" These women are the key. They saw him die, they saw him buried. That's what it says in the verses beforehand. Now they're up early and they're going to anoint the body. They're very devoted, aren't they? They're very devoted followers. They're the only ones left after the other disciples scatter. They get up early on the day after the Sabbath to anoint the body. They take spices that would have been expensive, would have been costly to them. They've got to move the stone away. They're not quite sure how they're going to do that. They're unsure what to do. And they're devoted followers and they're sincere followers, but in some ways they're wrong, aren't they? Because hadn't Jesus said he was going to die and rise? In fact, he said it on 3 occasions. Mark records it for us. I'm going to die, I'm going to rise. I'm going to die, I'm going to rise. I'm going to die, I'm going to rise. And they get to the tomb thinking they're going to find a dead Jesus there, but the stone is rolled away. The body they've come to anoint is gone. And if that's not enough, they find a heavenly messenger, a young man dressed in a white robe, and they are alarmed. These kind of heavenly messengers, they don't appear very often in the Bible at all, but here there is one here. And he says in verse 6, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He's risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him." Jesus, the man from Nazareth, the man who we know about from history, he was crucified, but now he's alive. That's what the messenger says. He's not here. In Luke's account, he records the angel, the man in white, has a little dig at them. Why do you look for the living amongst the dead? It's a good question. See, the point is, we're not here today to worship a dead hero, one we admire, one we look up to, a good teacher, but one who was dead and is now alive. It was almost 60 years ago that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. We remember his extraordinary life. We remember the things he achieved. He's a hero for many, but he's no longer alive. This says Jesus, who once was dead, is now alive. Christianity is essentially a relationship with the one who was dead but is now alive. He's not here, see? He's gone. And they'd seen where his body was laid. That's really obvious in chapter 15. And now they see and the body is gone. In those verses just before that Anne read for us from 1542 onwards, Joseph of Arimathea, A prominent member of the council went boldly to Pilate to ask for Jesus' body, and Jesus was dead. He says there in verse 43, Pilate asked for Jesus, he went to ask for Jesus' body because his body was dead. Pilate was surprised, verse 44, to hear that he was already dead, summoned the centurion and asked him if he'd already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, placed it in a tomb, then rolled the stone away. They saw where it was placed. He was dead. And they saw now that he was no longer there. He is risen. And when you think about it, why do we know so much about Jesus? I mean, there were other people who pretended to be messiahs, who did great things at the time. We know very, very little about them at all. The reason we know he died was because he rose. Plenty of people died, plenty of messiahs. No one would have been important enough to write about him unless something very significant happened. But there's a little bit more. Look at verse 16:7. Go tell his disciples and Peter, it's good news for Peter, he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you'll see him just as he told you. Tell his disciples to go to Galilee. Galilee. It's a very physical place. There are people who sometimes say, it's just that people just kind of felt like Jesus had risen, like he'd risen in their hearts. But Jesus said beforehand, I'm going to meet you in Galilee. And here it says, go back to Galilee. That is where he's going to meet you. Galilee, where it all began, where he began walking by the Sea of Galilee. And he called people to follow him. And he called people into that quest, which was to take people and catch them and make them, he said, I'm going to teach you how to fish for people. Galilee was where it began, and they're to go back there because that's where he's going to meet them. And finally, these women are the heroines until verse 8, and it suddenly all goes terribly wrong because verse 8, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. These women who've risked so much, now it seems, turned out to be no better than the men. Go and tell the disciples, go and tell them what's happened, but trembling and bewildered, they fled. They don't say anything to anyone because they're afraid. Now, I understand why they might be like that. I understand that they're trembling and bewildered. I understand they saw him die and they saw him buried and now he's gone and the body's not there anymore. And there's this angel thingy saying he's not here, and I understand they're very stressed. But as we're reading this, we're saying, come on, you've got to tell people. People need to know. The good news that this is all about, which began at the very beginning, chapter 1, verse 1 of Mark, the good news that everyone needs to know, but they're not saying anything. And we say to ourselves, how can it finish like this? It's a weird ending. When I was 13, I went on a school excursion to see the movie Picnic at Hanging Rock. Now, for a 13-year-old boy, it's not what you want. Young women walking around in the Australian bush, wearing funny hats and curtains, and the strange flute music that got played. And at the end, you get to the end of the movie and you think, what happened? Like, what happened to them? Apparently, the writer, Joan Lindsay, who wrote the novel, her editor, she had an ending and the editor thought it'd be better to take it out. Well, thanks very much for that. Enigmatic, unsatisfying ending. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. You get to the end of the 7 novels, and at the end, how does it end? Well, their kids go to Hogwarts. Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass. It was all a dream. Right, okay. Sometimes it happens in music. You get these very unsatisfying endings. Paul McCartney wrote a song in the 70s called Silly Love Songs. How someone who wrote Yesterday can also write a song called Silly Love Songs is beyond me. It's a very, very silly song. But it ends on chord 4. So a little bit of music theory, chord 4 is like an unresolved chord. It's a point of dissonance, and we're waiting for it to move to what's called consonance, but it stays on dissonance. And we say to ourselves, is that how the song ends? And as we're reading this, we're thinking to ourselves, is this how it all ends? You see, who's going to do the telling if they don't? If they are silent, how will anyone find out? Because the women are the only ones who know. But are they? Are they the only ones who know? Who else knows? You know. You've seen the ending. You've heard the message. You have been taken to the tomb. You know he was crucified, he was dead and buried. You have heard the message. He's not here, he's risen. You are in the same position as the women. So what will you do? Heard about breaking the fourth wall? Mark's inviting you to break the fourth wall. What will you do? Is it just too weird for you to say this Jesus rose? The British comedian Eddie Izzard, in a serious interview, said, "If there was life after death, it would be nice if just one person came back to let us know." Easter, maybe? Clive James, in an interview, was asked if he believed in God, and he said, "There cannot be a God, because if there was, he would impact our history in an unforgettable way." BC, AD, 7 billion people in the world. See, what does Mark 16 say to you? It's a very clever ending, isn't it? So you can be a follower of Jesus, you can know it's true. But will you be courageous or will you be fearful? Joseph goes to Pilate boldly and courageously asks for the body when he's dead. And the women, when they go to the tomb, they're nervous, they're afraid, and he's alive. Where is it with you? See, is there something beyond this long weekend that's bigger than just the weekend? Is it not a fact that someone has died for you? That someone has risen from the grave and holds out to you the gift as his expense, forgiveness and eternal life? You might be unconvinced and say, "I'll believe when I get proof," but God doesn't give us proof. He just gives us evidence. And we're invited to weigh up the evidence for ourselves. How did this come to us? How did we get this? What do you make of it? There is someone who's opened the gate to glory and will carry you through if you'll just trust him.